Tom joins us now. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
The way you're dressed, you've clearly just been in a new studio. You've just been
because I'm not in jeans, which is what I normally wander around.
Do you always dress like this?
Well, it's the first revelation of anyone who comes in to watch News at 10 that I'm... In fact, I shouldn't admit this, but I'm just too lazy half the time to put my proper suit on, so I quite often go down and News at 10 and just wearing my suit top. I mean,
shorts.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say I've ever actually worn shorts. That would be... Although when I first started out as a correspondent in Ireland, it was one of those things. It was a very, very busy story for about the first year and a half. It was the build-up to the first IRA ceasefire. So it was a massively busy story. And then it was a very, very busy story for 3 months. But then we kind of got into massively busy, then a bit of a lapse. Like we waited for the next turn of the peace process, Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness to go up to Stormont or whatever it was. So in the meantime, it was the summer and there wasn't a lot happening. So you would occasionally kind of be in your sort of shorts, in your kind of, I don't know, playing tennis or walking along a beach or something because it was hot. It wasn't that hot that often in Ireland, but when it was, and then suddenly your bleep would go off, or hilariously, everyone in the bureau's bleeps would go off in the domes of bleeps, and you'd all kind of belt somewhere, and you wouldn't have time to change, so you'd arrive at kind of outside Stormont in shorts, and I occasionally would do a sort of live, put my suit and tie on, and then the kind of camera would pan down afterwards. So yeah, a bit of that.
Well, how are the rehearsals going? You can't tell us too much, but how are they going for Thursday's programme?
They're great. I mean, I really love the overnight programmes. I like a lot of things about my job, but they're definitely the best fun things. I mean, fun's maybe not the right word, but also this is the 5th I've done in 4 years. Yeah. So 2015, 2016 referendum, 2017 and Trump. And of course, they've all ended up with totally gobsmacking or surprising results. So that's been incredibly amazing. It's 8 hours of, riding a bit of a adrenaline roller coaster and kind of not knowing quite where the story is going. So we'll see this time. I mean, of course, this may be the one time we get a clear result, or it may be not.
Yeah, you mentioned surprising results. We had Colin Rawlings on the podcast sitting where you're sitting, and he was talking about the exit poll, which we're expecting at 10 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned how he gets certain people in to have a chat with them before that 10 p.m. results to tell them what's going on. And he mentioned your name as one of them. So back in 2017, when that exit poll came out and it was a surprising result, he says that you knew about the result 10, 15 minutes before, and then you had to go out and actually talk for 15 minutes and essentially be poker face so no one had any idea. What's that like, having to...
Well, that in a way is I would say, if I had to pick one moment or one recurring moment that is the greatest privilege of my job, it would be that.
Been told the exit poll result.
Yeah, because it's just so weird. You've got a whole nation waiting for this result, and although the exit poll is not the result, it's an indication of what the result might be. 15 to 20 minutes before anyone else. And then that's just... I don't know why, but that's just so thrilling and weird and kind of extraordinary. And, we all get taken on. We're usually waiting in one of the corner offices here, and there's a tiny group of us, and there's a tiny group at the BBC and Sky. So I don't know how many people there are, maybe 20 people in the whole country who know the result of this before anyone else. And it's just a weird thing. And also it's very intense because for me, I've got to go into that studio and broadcast for 8 hours without a break. And I don't really know the direction of the story until, 10 or 15 minutes before I go into the studio. And also the last few times, or the last 2 times, the result's been so surprising. In 2017, my first question when Colin came in and told us the exit poll was like, do we even have a Labour target seat list? Because we'd not done one single rehearsal, I don't think, or proper rehearsal with the Labour targets. And the head of graphics was like, I think we got one from last time. I said, well, can you go out now and dust it down? And so your brain is like furiously working, and then you've only got a few minutes really to discuss with the team what the direction of the programme is in. And then I make a point of going out and sitting on the stairwell, which you will know is one of the most bleakest places on earth, and just sitting quietly for 3 minutes on my own and just trying to think it through. Okay, Tories have lost their majority. They're going to need to rely on the DUP. Could they ever rely on the Lib Dems? Would that ever work? What would the Lib Dems want? Would the Lib Dems ever do it? And you're trying to map out how 8 hours of broadcasting is going to go. And it's really the last time I have for 8 hours to have time to think at all.
And going back to before that, to the preparation, the build up to the exit poll, but also just the result of the night itself, how much do you prepare for those different scenarios? You talked there, you gave us a glimpse there of how you're thinking in those moments, but in the weeks leading up to election day, at what point do you start to sit down and really prepare for a massive marathon broadcast of 8 hours? And how do you prepare?
It's quite difficult to prepare because essentially the story you're given at 20 to 10 will have an energy and a dynamic of its own, and you sort of have to trust to that. So obviously how I prepare is sort of by having an ever thickening folder of stats about seats, target seats, how everyone's performed in previous elections, what happened last time, what happened the time before. I mean, the weird thing is it's a bit like cramming for an exam, and also because it's quite statistical and I'm not particularly statistical, it's sort of exam you were never very good at, like chemistry or maths. It's sort of like trying to cram a lot of knowledge into your head. Now, obviously, I'm surrounded by experts, so one of the things I make a point of doing is not trying to show how much I know, because that's a waste of time. I've got experts to tell me, or who know much more than I'm ever going to know. But you kind of want to know a certain baseline of stuff. So I do a lot of research. I have a team of researchers who help me. And we work very carefully, and we work through everything, and we go through the target seats over and over again, talking about, partly to just make sure that they're at the top of our mind, why they might be relevant, and so on and so forth. But all the same, the basic brutal reality is, once you get that exit poll, then the story has, then it's a live breaking story. It has a dynamic of its own, and then you're kind of off, and it's quite difficult to explain to people. It's the only. I don't think we sometimes like to pretend that broadcasting is quite hard, and it isn't particularly, but it's the only thing that I've found hard, in that your brain is working in three different ways. So you're concentrating on the conversation you're having at all times, but you're also listening to what the studio is telling you, and you're thinking about where you're going to go next. And I don't think our brains are wired to, maybe it's just men's brains aren't, but maybe it's just my brain. But that sort of multi-thinking for a long period, for 8 hours, is quite unnatural. So I always come out, and partly it's because the results have been quite dramatic, but I feel like someone has put a sledgehammer in my face. I literally can hardly think straight for about 48 hours because just so frazzled.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned it feeling like an exam. Whenever I've gone into an exam or I've crammed, if someone asks me what was on question 2, I have absolutely no memory of it. You talk about having to think about 3 things at once as you're going along. When you finish it, can you then recount everything that's happened over the course of the night?
No,
a bit of a blur.
No, it's a blur. I mean, I could tell you. I mean, I have to. So even election nights where, 2015 and 2017. Or any of them, actually, but let's just take the 2 general elections rather than the referendum and Trump that I've done. So, I was in the chair for 8 hours all night. I covered every dot and comma. I drove the kind of, the questioning and where we were going. Even now, I have to go back and read about it because it doesn't naturally stick in my mind. And of course, once you read it, it does all eventually come back. But, 2015, for example, when the SNP did so incredibly well, and that was a night of varying different stories. The Tories getting a majority, rather surprisingly, but the SNP sweeping the board in Scotland. It just disappears from your mind. Yeah. And I tell you what definitely disappears from your mind is all the cramming you did. And so, when I'm going back over the target seats this time, it's like Nuneaton, not really a target seat, a Labour target technically this time, but, I'm thinking, which election was it? Was Nuneaton was a key.
The big one, yeah.
target, I can't remember.
And things have moved so fast. 2015 election feels so long ago, and the seats that the Tory party wouldn't even try and win in 2015 are now right near the top. The demographics are changing so fast, aren't they? So even if you could recall it all, a lot of it's actually moved on, hasn't it?
And that, in a way, is one of the really interesting things about it, and the complications is that all the dynamics underlaying political identity are more volatile and changing. So it's, obviously there's a lot of talk about whether all these Labour Leave seats in the north are annoyed with the Labour Party, frustrated about the progress of Brexit, and are therefore, going to go to the Tories this time. But we just don't know. We don't know whether all those voters might be irritated with Labour, might be irritated that Brexit hasn't happened if they voted Leave, but they might decide, wake up on Thursday morning and decide, do you know what I really care about is the NHS. I'm going to go in and vote on that. And I think, I'm not saying they will, but that could be the thing. So I've become very adamant, even a bit obsessive. One of the things we've done on News at 10 in the course of this election is try really, really hard not to pay any attention to the polls.
Yep.
And we made no mention on the night of the big MRP poll for the Times, which we had many hours of debate around News at 10. And there were perfectly valid competing views. One was, look, everyone's going to be talking about it. It's a big poll. It was right last time. We should do it. And my view was, well, listen, the thing is, I've been covering politics 30 years, and the only consistent thing is how often the polls have got it wrong. They got it wrong in 2015, they got it wrong in the referendum in 2016, they got it wrong in 2017. So pointing out one poll that might have got it right doesn't really change the fact that the polls generally get it wrong. And I just sort of fundamentally feel that polls aren't news because they're not real, because you don't know whether they're really telling you anything about the electorate or not. And I feel that the polls have massively influenced the way we have covered elections for the 30 years I've been here. And I just think that's a fundamental problem. And we should just try to cover an election, as a public service broadcasting thing, with bringing as little prejudice of what we think the outcome is going to be as we possibly can, not least because the outcome has repeatedly proved to be surprising. And I'm trying to take that a stage further in kind of going into the election night programme, waiting for that big moment at 22 with literally no expectation in my mind.
Well, Professor Jane Green, who's on the show on the night she was on the podcast right at the start of the election. We were just chatting to her in the newsroom.
Brilliant.
She's amazing. We were chatting to her in the election in the newsroom, and we said, "Should we believe the new MRP poll that's out on Tuesday night?" And she said, "Don't know." And effectively, she said in that interview we had was, even those people in that world are saying, look at the trend. At absolute most, just look at the trend. Over the course of the 5 weeks, where's it roughly heading? That might tell you something. Yeah. But ultimately, it all depends on how good the data set is, and we don't know what the data set is.
There's always the question whether or not they're reinforcing, whether people look at polls and are swayed by themselves.
Yeah.
Well, also, I just think there is no fundamental way of assessing how the nation is going to vote in a big election. Millions of people. You can't. There's a whole bunch of it is self-selecting. Some people would never talk to a pollster, so you can't gauge them. And I mean, if you take 2017, one of the sheets I've got in my folder is all the polls from 2017. Now, yes, it's true that some of the final polls showed it was closer, and yes, it's true that there was a general trend towards tightening, but the fact of the matter is, there's probably 100 polls on my chart, and nearly all of them, including 4 or 5 of the final ones, showed a gap of 10 points between Labour and the Tories. Well, Labour did about 10 points better than most polls said, and no one's been able to explain what that is. Now, I'm not saying that will be true this time, but it might be, and I just don't think there's any massive net benefit to us as a major public service broadcaster in bringing too many assumptions either to the coverage of an election campaign. We should really be covering who's saying what and what it means. And then I think, particularly for election night, it just doesn't help us to go in with lots of misleads. Just it misleads you and means that your preparation isn't as good as it could be because you're assuming one outcome. I mean, you can perhaps model the most likely outcome a bit more than you do the others, but I don't think you benefit from falling into the assumption of how something is going to turn out.
Of course. On the night itself, you say that you've been covering politics for 30 years, and on election night, there have been loads of occasions when there's been a huge moment in which a political heavyweight has lost their seat, and it's been a major surprise. When you're in that seat and you're anchoring that overnight show, what's it like when there is that huge moment and you have to react to it, remain composed, and essentially deliver the news that a huge political player is not going to be returning to Westminster?
In a way, those are the moments you sort of live for, in the sense that it's high drama, and 8 hours is quite a long time. And there are moments in the middle of the night when you're kind of thinking, just the odd moment where you're thinking, I feel a bit exhausted. Flipping out, what's the time? 4 hours, still 2 hours to go. And then immediately, you're picked up by something unexpected or dramatic or exciting happening. And also, once you get past 2 o'clock, sort of 2 into 4:30, stuff happens so fast. And that's when really the kind of prep you're doing because it's a bit like, Bolton West, Bury North, and it's like, we're going to go to Bury North in a minute. Croydon, Battersea and Putney are coming up soon. Let's remind ourselves why those are relevant. Isha, Dominic Raab's seat, that's any second now. So there's a sort of excitement about those. I mean, the last election, you go back to 2015, the SNP sweep, Douglas Alexander, for example, losing a huge majority, all those big surprises, Nick Clegg losing his seat in the election after that. There have been these really big moments, and they're in a way they're the sort of waypoints that keep you kind of focused and excited through the night. Yeah, because in a way. And also last time, and I think this is there was so much voter volatility last time, and I think we got a really weird patchwork. I mean, our target board looked like a patchwork quilt rather than the days when we used to have uniform swing. Here we are, it's all blue or all red. It just doesn't seem to happen like that anymore. So there may be more of those moments. We just don't know.
Final couple of questions, because you've got to go back to your afternoon rehearsal. I'm very conscious of that. First question is a serious one. Second one, not so much. First one is talk through the lineup, because you've got George Osborne, you get Ed Balls, Alan Johnson, Joe Johnson, Ruth Davidson. It's a really big, high-profile lineup again, isn't it?
Part of everything we've done is about trying to be really super serious, not boring. It can still be entertaining, but just being super serious. Now, election night is arguably the most important thing we do as a news organisation, and it is absolutely vital that we're clear about what our offering is, I think, and why does anyone stay up to watch election night? 2 reasons, and 2 reasons only. They're not watching an entertainment programme. They don't mind if it's entertaining. If it's more entertaining on the other side, that's great. But they want to know what's happened and what does it mean. So if you're doing an election night programme with all the costs that entails, my take is you want the most analytical, the most heavyweight, the best. So really, I probably put more effort and thought into trying to help build the best team on election night than almost anything else over the last 5 years. And I feel like we've got 2 of the best political scientists in the country, both bring different things, Professor Jane Green and Professor Colin Rowlings. And then, we've got George Osborne and Ed Balls, who were a kind of bit of a revelation last time. And I think the reason they were a revelation was because normally, the politicians you would have in the first hour and a half were party spokesmen who were just quoting the party line, which is very tedious. And then here's suddenly 2 effectively ex-politicians with enormous knowledge, because they've all run campaigns and everything else, and enormous sources of intelligence suddenly talking frankly, and that was quite
speaking their mind, yeah.
So we're just taking that a little bit. We're taking everything we thought we did that gave us the edge last time, and then we're building on it.
And in that, this time, on that premise of having people that know a lot, are clever, but not kind of attached to the party machine anymore. Ruth Davidson's a good example of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So Gisela Stewart.
Exactly. So we're trying to pick people outside the party machines, because essentially, when I first did election night in 2015, and in fact when I was political editor doing election night in 2010, and in 2010 I suppose I was sort of watching and kind of taking it in. My central observation about it, and certainly in 2015, was how much party spokespeople stick to the party line for the first 2 hours until you start to get any kind of results. They're very much, the exit poll's only an exit poll, and they've literally been given a line which they all parrot. Now that's really boring, and it really drags. So we're just, by having ex-politicians who've got a lot to say and a lot of knowledge, you're just basically short-circuiting that.
And final, go on.
When the cameras stop rolling and you're done for the day, or done for the night, I should say, what's the first thing that you do? You've just done 8 hours on the screen. You've just absorbed all that information. You've just spoken to the country. You finally get a break. What's the first thing you're going to do?
The first thing is sit there in a bit of a lump. I mean, it's quite weird, because there's so many people. We took a photograph last time, and I can't remember how many of us there are, but even just the studio teams is like, it felt like about 100 people. I mean, there's a lot of people involved in election night. And one of the things that makes you realise what a privilege it is that, you come in at sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon, or 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and you see all this kind of effort and infrastructure, and there's a moment where you think to yourself, well, better not screw it up. There's a lot riding on this, and all the rest. And obviously then, 5th time out this time, it's a lot easier. You don't really bring that, and you can kind of sit back and maybe enjoy it. Not that I've never, I've always enjoyed it, but, even more. But, when you get to the end, you just sort of like, it's sort of weird because you're a little bit hyped up, because you've usually hyped yourself up for the last 2 or 3 minutes, and you kind of end with and so there it is, the nation has spoken, we've got this, blah, blah, blah. So there's a bit of you that sort of you've directed your last bit of adrenaline, and then it's just like, Lord, I mean, I haven't moved from the studio for 8 hours. I haven't stopped thinking or whatever. So there's a bit of your brain that automatically goes into jelly mode, and so you just sort of sit there like a bit of a vegetable. And then we usually have a sort of after breakfast somewhere, and I find it quite difficult to string a sentence together. And then and then I sort of go back home, and I'm usually sort of attempting to get some rest or sleep, and you're like, there's no way I'm sleeping. Just lying there, absolutely wired. So yeah, and in the referendum, I did news at 10 that night, which was a big mistake. Actually,
I remember that.
You sort of like you
remember seeing you
crank yourself back up again, and by the end of that, you're probably a bit of
I remember seeing that at the time, thinking, "Wow, fair enough."
Wow,
stamina,
idiot.
Tom,
which was the right conclusion.
I was going to ask you what you eat in those 8 hours, but we're obsessed with food on the podcast.
Oh, I'll tell you. Well,
we're stuck for time. We're like Robert,
it's
while
fine.
we're winding you up.
I'll tell you very briefly. More of a question for me is what I drink.
Okay.
Because obviously,
reveal that on
well,
the
you
podcast?
can't. Whiskey, beer after. So you. Well, I guess you could go to the loo, but I generally haven't. So you've got 8 hours. But so
8 hours that go to the toilet.
Yeah. So the first time you kind of.
Wow.
The first time I thought to myself, I guess I could. I just never have. So the first time I thought, how am I going to manage the drinking? And so I decided that I would drink a lot of water in the day and then not from 5.
Okay.
And then I would pick up again at 2 in the morning, which actually works quite well. That does
no
work
coffee?
No coffee or anything like that. And then I just tend to eat like bananas and chocolate all night. It's like not the world's best diet. I wouldn't recommend it. Don't do this at home.
Well, on the bombshell that you don't go to the toilet for 8 hours, which is we'll end it there. Tom, thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. And good luck.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Enjoyed it.